Hello, magical experimenters. This is Taylor Elwood, and welcome to the latest Magical Experiments live stream. This week I thought I would talk about visualization. I've been wanting to do this video for a little while now, and just kind of been distracted by recent events and everything. So, here we are now doing it a little bit later than planned, but that's okay. Better later than never. So, it's fair to say that when the visualization is probably one of the most hyped up magical techniques and in magic, and I think it's overhyped a lot of times. People get really wrapped up around visualizing stuff to the point that sometimes I think that what ends up happening is you get a diluted version of visualization or a diluted approach. Like people will say, well, I'm going to visualize X, in the hopes that it'll become Y, and they won't necessarily do anything beyond the visualization itself. And the reason why is because they've kind of gotten sold this idea on visualization that that in and of itself it's a end all be all approach to magical workings. But I don't think that's the case. I think visualization does have its place in magic, but it's kind of like how eyesight is treated as the most important of the five senses when in fact it's really not. I mean, yes, being able to see is pretty important, but obviously not everybody can see, and the people who can't see, I mean, would they like to be able to see? I don't know. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. I don't want to make assumptions here, but point being, they're able to get by in life without necessarily being able to see. It's not necessarily the most important sense in the world, but we often treat it that way because people who are sighted take for granted the primacy of vision because it's something that we use every day. Why do I compare that to visualization? Well, I compare it to visualization because one, we are essentially visualizing, we are essentially using that sense of sight in order to visualize. But two, because visualization is often kind of it is treated as a be all end all magical technique in and of itself a lot of times without the necessary context being put into place. The necessary context in this case is that yes, visualization can be a very useful tool or technique that you can employ, but it's in and of itself, it's not the end all be all. It's just one among many techniques. And as with any kind of magical working, we necessarily should employ some type of critical awareness about what we are doing and why we are doing it, and why we're using a given magical technique or process in order to accomplish something we want to do. I stress that a lot because I think it's key to successful magical workings. It's like if every single time you do a magical working, you're doing visualization. It's like taking a hammer and applying that as a tool for every single thing. Under the right context, a hammer works great, but a hammer isn't going to work for every single situation, and it's the same thing with visualization. So let's look for a moment at where visualization can be helpful. I think that, and based on my own experience with visualization, I would say that visualization is very handy for like invocation, as well as evoking spirits, because if you can visualize the entity that you're working with or the spirit that you're working with, that can be a very useful way to connect with that spirit. It's not the only method you can use for invoking or evoking spirits. I want to be very clear about that, but it is useful. I particularly find it useful for path working, where for example, I might, do a path working with a given deity or something like that, where you're using specific correspondences or other associations in order to help build a rapport with the spirit. I also find visualization helpful when I'm doing work, like if I'm doing astral work, or if I'm doing work with my memory palace or things along those lines. The ability to visualize can be very helpful in those cases because it's allowing you to connect with an environment, a virtual environment that you're creating around your visualization. And in fact, if we really think about visualization, that's really the most powerful thing about visualization, is that visualization helps us create virtual environments. In a very real sense, when you're reading a book, you know, you are visualizing the characters of that book. You're also likely hearing those characters. You might even feel like you're one of those characters, and this is where other senses come into play. And this is why we don't want to rely on visualization alone. But at the same time, again, I want to emphasize that yes, there is value to visualization. I think where visualization falls short is when people start using it to, like, let's just say like somebody goes and they visualize their goals, or they visualize something that they want to have happen in you know, practical life. This is where I find that visualization falls short, because you can visualize something to your heart's content, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's happened. Does visualization have a place in you know, like in practical magic, in the sense of, like, you know, you want to manifest something? Well, yes, visualization could have a role in that. I use visualization, for example, if I'm trying to manifest a distinct possibility. One of the things I might do as an initial step is use visualization to help me visualize the specific path that I'm going to take and the steps that I'm going to take. What this does is it allows me to use visualization to plan out the process that's going to be involved in order to manifest something. I also use visualization as a way of scanning a potential timeline, or scanning a possibility and seeing what could happen down the way. This helps me to either avoid certain things, or to avoid certain problems, or to plan out responses to those problems, because what I've done is I've effectively visualized them and planned for them and anticipated them as a result. So again, visualization has its role and its place, but it's when we only rely upon visualization to accomplish something that we start to miss out on the efficacy of other magical work. So, you know, that's where then I say, well, let's start relying upon other things. For example, if you're familiar with my book Inner Alchemy of Life, where I describe my process for connecting with the neurotransmitters and the microbial life, visualization initially is very helpful in that process. You know, going into your body and being able to come to a space where you visualize a given neurotransmitter or a microbial life form can be helpful for initially connecting with it. But then what I like to do is I like to take it a step further, and I like to actually go into that microbial, into the distinct feeling and sensation and experience of that microbial life, or the neurotransmitter. You know, for example, if I'm choosing to work with serotonin, what does serotonin actually feel like? So instead of just visualizing serotonin, which has a limited effectiveness, I'm going to actually connect with serotonin on a sensorial, experiential way that allows me to feel the way that serotonin impacts the neurochemistry of my body, and impacts the way that my emotions and other things are effectively treated by serotonin. So this is where, you know, we look at visualization and we see its limitations, and then we start to bring in other techniques as a way of bridging the gap and more fully embracing and engaging in the magical work. The same thing applies to working with a magical spirit, you know, spirit or something along those lines. Like if I'm working with a daemon, for example, well, you know, I could do the initial thing as a visualization of the sigil, and maybe I visualize the appearance of the demon. But at a certain point, I may want to connect with that daemon much more directly. And so what I might do is I might call out its name and use the toning of its name, the sound of the name, as a way to establish a connection with the vibration of that spirit, and use that vibratory awareness to allow me to connect with it in a different way than just visualization alone would give me. This is why when we look at any given magical technique, we should look at the other techniques that are available to us and ask ourselves, you know, how can I supplement a given magical technique? If I'm going to use visualization, great, but what else could I use in conjunction with it in order to help me manifest desired possibilities and to get better results? If I'm going to use visualization to connect with a spirit, okay, fair enough. But what else am I going to want to use that might help me to deepen that relationship with the spirit? When we only look at one technique and only use that technique for what we're doing with magical work, we limit ourselves and we limit the effectiveness of the magical work. You know, with any given technique, you should always look at it from the perspective of what can this technique do for me? What can it do? And what else can I use to supplement what it can't do? If there's other things that I could be doing around visualization that could help me take that work even further, what are those things? Or if there's a technique that I'm using that doesn't incorporate visualization, how could I use visualization to enhance and integrate into that other technique so that way I have a deeper experience? This is why, you know, when we take a balanced approach to magic and we look at all of the tools that we have available to us, we get much more out of the magical work because we're not limiting ourselves to one expression of magical work. Instead, what we're doing is we're supplementing and enhancing the overall work that we're doing. And as a result, what we end up getting is a much better experience because we're not limiting ourselves in one way. And you know, case in point, I saw a post in the Magical Experiments Facebook group where someone was talking about doing visualization around like wealth magic. I thought to myself, you know, yeah, you could do visualization for wealth magic work, but how far is that really going to get you? My thought on that would be like, okay, yeah, you can do, you know, visualize somebody else like being more successful or whatever, like, you know, but what else could you be doing to help that person out? Maybe what you end up doing is you do a magical, you do the visualization to kind of plan out like what it should look like and what it shouldn't look like. And then what you do is you take that visualization and you apply it to some type of spell or something else. And so what you're doing is you're giving that spell form and substance that directs the way that that spell is going to manifest. That's an example of where, you know, you take a given technique and you apply it to another technique in order to create a much more holistic and focused perspective with your magical work. So anyway, those are my thoughts on visualization. It is useful, but I think as with anything else, you want to make sure you balance out your magical work. You know, learn all the techniques that you can. A way that I look at it really is that when you're learning when you're learning magical work, whether you're just starting out or you're more experienced, you want to consistently be rounding out your foundation, rounding out the way that you do magic. Maybe you're strong in one area, like you're really good at divination, but you're not good at something else. Or maybe, you know, you're good at working with spirits, but you're not good at other forms of practical magic. That's why you want to round that stuff out. Because you don't want to be strong in just one area. You want to have a well-balanced approach to your magical work. And that's why, like with me, you were to look at how I do magical work in general, it is much more balanced in a lot of ways than it might seem to be because the focus really is on fleshing out all of the areas of magic as opposed to just one area or another. By doing that, the benefit that I get from it is that I'm able to then draw upon those different techniques when I need to supplement what I'm already doing, and I have a much more thorough understanding of how magic works because I'm not limiting myself to just what my strengths are. Instead, I'm really trying to get a balanced approach to magic that allows me that actually helps me become stronger and better at magic in general. All right, that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.